Story number 1. Whispers in the Blizzard, March 11th, 1888. The great blizzard of 1888 had descended upon New York City like an unforgiving specter. I remember the morning vividly. The sky was a steel gray, heavy with snow that began to fall in earnest by dawn. As a young newspaper reporter, I had ventured out to cover the storm's progression, eager to capture the relentless fury of nature. Little did I know, the storm would trap me in a nightmare from which I might never escape. I had taken refuge in an old, abandoned townhouse on 23rd Street, a building with a history as dark and twisted as the snowstorm outside. The windows were thick with frost, and the wind howled through the broken panes, creating an eerie symphony of creaks and groans. The front door had given way hours earlier, leaving me stranded inside with nothing but the flickering light of a single candle for company. As the hours turned into days, the isolation began to gnaw at my sanity. The city was transformed into a desolate, white wasteland. Streets were buried under feet of snow, and the usual cacophony of traffic and pedestrians was replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional crash of collapsing buildings or the distant howl of the wind. Food and warmth became scarce commodities, heightening the tension within the cramped confines of the townhouse. It was on the second night that I first heard the whispers. They were faint at first, barely audible over the howling storm, but persistent enough to draw my attention. "Help us," they seemed to murmur, carried on the icy drafts that snaked through the house. I dismissed them as the tricks of a frayed mind, a consequence of exhaustion and hunger. Yet, as the nights wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the empty halls and darkened rooms. Sleep eluded me as fear took root. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, seemed to carry the voices of the lost. I began to explore the townhouse, searching for the source of the whispers, hoping to quell the growing dread within me. Each room told a story of abandonment and decay, furniture draped in white sheets, remnants of lives long forgotten. It was in the attic that I found it, an old snow globe, perched atop a dusty wooden table, untouched by time. The snow globe was beautiful in its simplicity. A miniature village lay within, surrounded by a flurry of artificial snow. Tiny lampposts flickered with a golden glow, casting long shadows over the quaint houses and silent streets. As I reached out to touch it, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like the very storm outside. "Set us free," they pleaded, their voices now clear and desperate, compelled by a mixture of fear and fascination. I shook the globe gently. The snow inside danced and settled, revealing a different scene. The miniature village was engulfed in chaos, buildings ablaze, cars overturned, and figures running frantically through the snow. Among them, I recognized ghostly apparitions of people, their faces twisted in terror and pain. The whispers became screams, their anguish echoing in my mind. Suddenly, the townhouse seemed to shift. The walls closed in, the attic transforming into the very village depicted inside the snow globe. I found myself standing in the midst of the miniature disaster, the biting cold seeping into my bones. The spirits around me wailed, their spectral hands reaching out in a futile attempt to escape their frozen purgatory. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted into the howling wind, desperation fueling my words. "What do you want from me?" A figure emerged from the chaos, her form translucent and ethereal. Her eyes bore into mine, filled with a sorrow that transcended the physical realm. "We are trapped by the storm," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of countless lost souls. "You must help us break the curse." I stumbled through the snowy streets, the snow globe's miniature disaster mirroring the raging blizzard outside. Memories of the storm's devastation flooded my mind, stories of families torn apart, lives lost to the merciless cold. The spirits were echoes of those tragedies, bound to the snow globe as a vessel of their eternal suffering. Determined to free them, I searched for answers within the chaos, Clues led me to an old church at the edge of the village, its stained glass windows shattered by the tempest. Inside, I found a diary belonging to Elias Hartman, a man who had lost his family to the storm. His final entry spoke of a desperate attempt to save them, using dark rituals to contain their spirits within the snow globe, hoping to preserve their memories forever. But the ritual had backfired, trapping their souls in a perpetual cycle of despair. To break the curse, the diary concluded, one must confront the storm's heart and offer a sacrifice of pure intention. Understanding the gravity of the situation, I knew what I had to do. I returned to the snow globe, now a portal between the townhouse and the haunted village. The spirits watched as I approached, their sorrowful eyes reflecting my own desperation. I began the ritual, reciting the ancient words from Elias's diary. The storm outside seemed to respond, the wind howling louder, the snow swirling in a frenzy. I placed my hand on the snow globe, pouring my intent into the ceremony. Pure hope, a desire to release these tormented souls from their eternal winter. A blinding light enveloped the townhouse, the storm's fury converging into a singular point. The spirits began to fade, their anguished cries turning into whispers of gratitude. The snow globe cracked, the miniature village dissolving into a radiant light that spread throughout the house. As the light subsided, the storm outside began to abate, the winds dying down and the snow settling into a peaceful stillness. The townhouse, once a prison of fear and despair, felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like the first rays of dawn after a long night. I stood alone in the now tranquil attic, the remnants of the snow globe scattered across the wooden floor. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a profound silence that spoke of peace restored. I knew that the spirits were finally free, their suffering ended by my willingness to confront the darkness and offer them the release they so desperately needed. Days turned into weeks, and life in New York City slowly returned to normal. The Great Blizzard of 1888 remained a stark reminder of nature's might and the fragility of human existence. I resumed my work as a reporter, my experiences during the storm shaping my perspective on life and the unseen forces that linger in its wake. But even now, years later, I sometimes catch glimpses of those lost souls in my dreams, flickering shadows in the snow, their eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. The snow globe, once a symbol of entrapment, became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of compassion to bridge the realms of the living and the dead. In the end, the storm was more than just a natural disaster. It was a convergence of past and present, a meeting of souls bound by tragedy and freed by hope. And as I reflect on those harrowing days, I am reminded that sometimes the greatest horrors lie not in the storms that ravage our world, but in the silent suffering of those who cannot find their way home. Story number 2. The Blizzard of 1978. January 15th, 1978. The Midwest had never seen a storm like this. As the first reports came in, I was driving my old Chevy through the winding highways of rural Illinois, hauling lumber to Chicago. The forecast had predicted heavy snowfall, but nothing could have prepared me for the relentless fury that was about to descend upon us. I'd been on the road for hours, the landscape transforming from rolling hills to barren fields blanketed in an early layer of snow. My radio crackled with updates, warnings of blinding snowstorms, treacherous winds, and plummeting temperatures, but stubbornness and a sense of duty kept me pressing forward, despite the mounting concerns. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to an ominous gray, and the wind began to howl like a living thing, whipping snowflakes into a frenzied dance. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and my headlights struggled to cut through the thickening whiteout. I decided to find shelter, steering off the main road toward a small town I vaguely remembered from earlier trips. The town appeared out of nowhere, a ghostly silhouette against the swirling snow. Streetlights flickered intermittently, their weak glow barely illuminating the deserted streets. I pulled into what looked like an old gas station. its windows dusty and covered in frost. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of gasoline and stale coffee. Evening, I called out to the empty space, hoping for a sign of life. Silence greeted me, broken only by the distant roar of the storm outside. Reluctantly, I decided to wait out the storm here, thinking the gas station might offer some temporary refuge. As the hours dragged on, the storm intensified. Snow piled up against the windows, turning the world outside into a swirling vortex of white. I tried to distract myself by reading a worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea. But sleep was elusive. The wind's howling seemed to seep into my bones, and the isolation gnawed at my sanity. Around midnight, a faint noise broke the stillness, a soft, almost imperceptible tapping against the glass. My heart raced as I approached the window, expecting to see a stray animal seeking shelter. Instead, I saw nothing but the blinding snowstorm, relentless and unyielding. Shaking my head, I turned away, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me. But the noises continued, growing louder and more insistent. It wasn't just tapping anymore, there were whispers, muffled voices carried on the icy drafts. My pulse quickened as I strained to listen, the words indistinct but filled with anguish. I glanced at my watch, 1:47 a.m., and a chill ran down my spine. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within me, a tempest of fear and uncertainty. Desperate for answers, I approached the counter and found a dusty, old phone. My hands trembled as I lifted the receiver, dialing a number I hoped would lead to help. But instead of a dial tone, I was met with a low, eerie moan that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the gas station. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely a whisper. Silence. I hung up quickly, my mind racing with fear. I decided to leave the safety of the gas station and find better shelter, hoping to escape the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the place. As I stepped outside, the wind slapped against my face, and the snow stung my eyes, making it hard to see. I pulled my coat tighter, trying to shield myself from the biting cold. Navigating through the blinding snow was a nightmare. Every step was a struggle against the wind, the cold seeping into my bones. The landscape was a monochromatic expanse of white, the familiar roads and landmarks swallowed by the storm. Panic began to set in as I realized I was hopelessly lost, the storm obscuring any sense of direction. Minutes felt like hours as I trudged forward, the whispers from inside the gas station echoing in my mind. Shadows seemed to move just beyond my vision, shapes that danced and twisted in the periphery of my sight. Quickened my pace, driven by a primal fear that kept me moving despite the exhaustion and freezing temperatures. Just as hope was fading, I spotted a faint light through the blizzard. Relief surged through me as I made my way toward it. Stumbling through the knee-deep snow, the light grew brighter, revealing a small farmhouse nestled against the hillside. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a beacon of warmth in the relentless storm. I approached the house cautiously, my body aching from the cold and fatigue. I knocked on the door, the sound muffled by the howling wind. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Please," I gasped, shivering uncontrollably. "I need help. The storm, it's terrible." The man ushered me inside, closing the door against the fury outside. The interior was cozy, the fireplace crackling with a welcoming warmth. I collapsed onto a chair, gratitude washing over me. As I warmed myself by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The man introduced himself as Henry, the sole inhabitant of the farmhouse. He offered me a cup of hot tea and listened patiently as I recounted my harrowing journey through the storm. His demeanor was calm, almost unnervingly so, as he nodded sympathetically. "You're lucky to have found shelter here," he said softly. "This storm has taken so many lives. Your truck, I saw it on the road earlier. No one's been seen since the blizzard hit." My heart sank as I remembered the gas station and the eerie noises that had plagued me. "Do you know anyone else out there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Henry shook his head. "No one else is left in the area." The storm was merciless, unforgiving. Many didn't make it through the night. As the night wore on, I felt a growing unease settle over me. The house, though warm and inviting, felt oddly silent. The only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of the storm. I tried to sleep, but the whispers from the gas station haunted my dreams, their sorrowful cries echoing in the darkness. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of footsteps echoing through the house. Groggy and disoriented, I sat up, the cold sweat trickling down my spine. The footsteps grew louder, approaching my room. I reached for the lamp beside my bed, but before I could turn it on, the door creaked open. There stood Henry, his eyes hollow and his expression blank. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice a mere breath. Fear seized me as I realized something was terribly wrong. The warmth of the house seemed to chill my very soul, and the once kind eyes of Henry now gleamed with a malevolent light. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't respond, rooted to the spot by an unseen force. "Help us!" The whispers echoed again, this time louder and more desperate, filling the room with their haunting presence. Henry began to speak in a language I couldn't understand, his words twisting and contorting like the snowstorm outside. The room seemed to warp and shift, the walls closing in around me as the temperature plummeted. Shadows danced in the corners, taking on grotesque forms that reached out to me with icy fingers. I struggled to break free, my mind racing with terror as the whispers grew into anguished screams. Images of lost souls trapped in the blizzard flashed before my eyes. Families huddled together, their faces twisted in pain and fear, their lives cut short by the merciless storm. Desperate, I remembered the snow globe from the gas station. It was my only connection to the outside world, the only link to understanding the supernatural forces at play. Summoning every ounce of strength, I reached into my pocket and pulled it out, holding it up to the flickering light. The globe's delicate snow swirled violently, the miniature playground transforming into a scene of chaos and despair. The spirits within seemed to respond, their sorrowful eyes meeting mine through the glass. "Release us," they implored, their voices blending with the storm's fury. A surge of energy coursed through me as I began to speak the words of release I had found in an old journal. The language was foreign, but the intent was clear: compassion, a desire to free the trapped souls from their eternal torment. As I recited the final words, the house shook violently, the walls cracking and the roof caving in under the storm's relentless assault. The snow globe shattered in my hands, the glass fragments dissolving into the air like snowflakes caught in the wind. The spirits began to fade, their anguished cries turning into whispers of gratitude as they were finally free. The storm outside began to abate, the howling winds silenced by the release of the trapped souls. The farmhouse stood still, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as peace settled over the land. I felt the weight of fear and sorrow lift from my shoulders, replaced by a profound sense of relief and closure. Exhausted but alive, I left the farmhouse the next morning, the storm a distant memory behind me. The roads were clear, the sun breaking through the clouds to cast a warm glow over the snowy landscape. I returned to my truck, the snow globe now nothing more than broken glass on the dashboard, a testament to the horrors I had faced and the lives I had helped save. Years later, I still remember that blizzard and the haunted farmhouse. It taught me that some storms are more than just natural disasters. They are conduits for the lost and the broken, a reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of compassion. And as I continue to drive the highways, I carry the memory of that night with me, a chilling reminder that even in the harshest of storms, there is hope for those who dare to face the darkness. Story number 3. Storm of the Century, 1993. March 1993. The Midwest was no stranger to harsh winters, but nothing could have prepared me for the storm that descended upon us that year. I was living in a small town in northern Illinois, a place where the most excitement came from the annual county fair and the occasional high school football game. Life was predictable, comfortable even, until the day the sky turned dark and the wind began to howl like a living beast. I remember waking up to the distant rumble of thunder, an unusual sound for a late winter morning. As I sipped my coffee, the news on the radio warned of an impending blizzard, one that was expected to sweep across 26 states. From the warmth of Florida to the icy grip of Maine, the meteorologists called it the storm of the century, a name that now seemed both grandiose and ominous. By noon, the snow began to fall, light at first, then rapidly intensifying into a relentless downpour of white. The wind picked up, whipping the snow into blinding blizzards that obscured everything outside. By evening, the world outside was transformed into a frozen wasteland. Visibility was reduced to mere feet, and the temperature plummeted, making every breath a struggle. My wife, Laura, our 2-year-old son, Tommy, and I huddled together in our living room, the sounds of the storm creating a constant, unnerving backdrop. We had stockpiled supplies, food, water, blankets, but as the hours turned into days, it became clear that we were not alone in our struggle against the storm. The first night was restless. The howling wind seemed to penetrate every crack and crevice, making the house groan and creak under the pressure. Laura tried to keep Tommy entertained, reading him stories and singing lullabies, but I found myself staring blankly at the window, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. As the days wore on, the storm showed no signs of relenting. Power outages became frequent, plunging us into darkness for hours on end. We relied on candles and flashlights, but the eerie shadows they cast only amplified our fears. Food supplies dwindled, and the once cozy home felt more like a prison, cut off from the outside world. It was on the third night that things took a turn for the worse. We heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, crunching through the thick snow. Laura grabbed a flashlight, her hands trembling as she pointed it toward the window. Nothing was visible, just the swirling snow and the impenetrable darkness. We tried to reassure each other, but the fear lingered, festering in the silence. The next morning, we discovered our neighbor's house completely buried under meters of snow. They hadn't been seen since the storm began, their disappearance adding to the growing list of missing persons. The radio crackled with reports of entire communities isolated, struggling to survive against the unforgiving elements. As the storm continued, strange occurrences began to unfold within our own home. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut without warning, and whispers echoed through the halls at night. Laura attributed it to our heightened stress and lack of sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent was watching us, waiting for an opportunity to strike. One evening, as the storm reached its peak, the power failed completely. We were left in total darkness, the only light coming from the flickering candles that cast long, dancing shadows across the room. The temperature dropped further, our breaths visible in the frigid air. Laura wrapped herself tightly around Tommy, while I sat by the window, trying to peer through the thick layers of snow. That's when I saw it, a figure, barely discernible, standing outside our home. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by the storm's intensity. But as I watched, the figure became more defined, a ghostly apparition with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. It stood motionless, staring directly at us, as if pleading for help. I called out, my voice shaky. "Hello? Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't respond, but the air around us seemed to grow colder, the whispers turning into mournful cries. Laura clutched Tommy closer, fear etched on her face. I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow emanating from the apparition, a pain that transcended the physical storm outside. Determined to uncover the truth, I recalled the stories of old, tales of spirits trapped by nature's fury, unable to find peace. The storm of the century wasn't just a battle against the elements. It was a confrontation with the restless souls caught in its path. I decided that, to survive, we needed to help them. I rummaged through our supplies, finding a stack of old journals and a map of the area. According to local legends, there was an old cemetery on the outskirts of town, where many of the lost had been laid to rest. Perhaps the spirits were seeking a way to move on, a final resting place beyond the storm's grasp. We bundled up as best as we could, layering blankets and using our remaining food to keep warm. The journey through the blinding snow was arduous, each step a battle against the biting cold and the fierce winds. The house looked like a ghostly remnant of itself, windows shattered and doors ajar, the storm having claimed more of the town's inhabitants. Finally, we reached the cemetery, its wrought iron gates barely visible through the thick snow. The air was still, the only sound the distant howl of the wind. We made our way between the gravestones, the weight of loss pressing down on us. The moon peeked through the storm clouds, casting an ethereal glow on the snow-covered ground. As we entered the central area, the atmosphere shifted. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the tombstones, guiding us toward a forgotten grave. An old, weathered headstone marked the resting place of Elias Hartman, a name that seemed to resonate with the pain we felt. According to the local lore, Elias was a toymaker whose family had perished in the 1888 blizzard, their spirits forever bound to the snow and ice. I knelt beside the grave, pulling out a candle from our dwindling supplies. The flame flickered, casting shadows that danced around us. "Elias," I whispered, "we're here to help you and your family find peace. Please, let us know what you need." The air grew colder, the snow swirling around us like a protective barrier. A ghostly light emanated from the grave, and the spirits of Elias and his family materialized before us. Their eyes, filled with sorrow and longing, met ours, and the whispers transformed into a harmonious chant. We began to speak the words of release, reciting prayers and offering our intentions to free their souls from the storm's relentless grip. The candle flame burned brighter, the light enveloping the spirits in a warm, soothing glow. The ground beneath us trembled as the spirits began to ascend, their forms dissipating into the night sky, carried away by the storm's dying winds. As the last of the spirits faded, the snowstorm outside began to abate, the winds calming and the snow settling into a peaceful blanket. We stood up, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as a sense of tranquility settled over the cemetery. The storm had claimed its victims, but it had also granted us a glimpse into the lives lost and the power of compassion to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. We made our way back home, the storm now a distant memory, leaving behind a town forever changed by its fury. The storm of the century had tested our resilience, pushing us to the brink of survival and beyond. But through the darkness and the fear, we had found hope and strength in the face of nature's wrath. Years later, I still remember that harrowing experience. The storm taught me that even in the most desperate times, there is room for compassion and understanding. The spirits we encountered were not malevolent. They were lost souls yearning for peace, victims of a storm that had taken more than just lives. It had stolen their stories and their connections. Now, whenever a storm rolls in, I think back to that winter of 1993. I remind myself of the fragility of life and the enduring bonds that tie us to those who have gone before. The storm of the century was a battle against the elements, but it was also a testament to the human spirit's capacity for empathy and the belief that even in the darkest of times, light can find a way to shine through. And so, as the winds howl and the snow begins to fall, I remember the souls we freed and the lessons learned amidst the fury of the storm. The blizzard of 1993 was more than just a natural disaster. It was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there is always a chance to make a difference, to bring peace to those who have been lost, and to find hope amidst the storm. Story number 4. The Great American Blizzard of 2016. I never thought a storm could change everything. Growing up in New York City, I'd seen my fair share of snowstorms, but nothing like the one that hit in January 2016. It was supposed to be just another blizzard, another test of our city's resilience. But as the snow piled higher and the winds howled with unnatural ferocity, it became clear that this storm was something else entirely. I was working late at the office in Midtown, buried under stacks of paperwork and the incessant hum of fluorescent lights. The weather reports had been grim all week, forecasting record-breaking snowfall and gale-force winds. By the time I left the office, the city had transformed into a monochromatic wasteland. Snowdrifts reached the second-floor windows, and the streets were eerily silent. The usual cacophony of honking cars and bustling pedestrians swallowed by the storm. My apartment was on the 5th floor of a historic brownstone in the Upper West Side, a building that had withstood countless winters. I unlocked the door, greeted by the familiar warmth and the comforting smell of home-cooked food. I hung my coat, grabbed a blanket, and settled into the living room with a cup of hot tea, hoping to wait out the storm. But sleep eluded me. The wind outside was relentless, howling through the cracks in the windows and rattling the panes with a ferocity that felt almost alive. The power flickered intermittently, plunging the apartment into darkness before returning with a disorienting buzz. I tried to distract myself by reading, but my mind kept wandering to the stories I'd heard about this storm, how it had paralyzed the East Coast, leaving thousands stranded and lifeless in its wake. Around midnight, the whispers began. First, they were faint, like distant echoes carried on the wind. I thought it was just my imagination, a side effect of the isolation and the storm's eerie ambience. But as the hours dragged on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to emanate from the very walls of my apartment, a chorus of sorrowful voices blending with the storm's fury. I tried to ignore them, telling myself that they were just sounds amplified by the storm. But then I saw it, a shadow moving against the backdrop of the snow-covered cityscape visible through my window. First, I thought it was a trick of the light, a fleeting glimpse of something or someone caught in the storm. But as I stared, the shadow took shape, morphing into a figure that stood motionless in the middle of the street. Heart pounding, I approached the window, peering out into the blinding white. The figure was still there, a lone silhouette against the endless expanse of snow. I rubbed my eyes, blinking rapidly, but when I looked again, it was gone. Relief washed over me, only to be replaced by a gnawing unease. The whispers grew louder, turning into mournful cries that pierced the silence. "Help us," they seemed to say, their voices filled with desperation and pain. I felt a chill run down my spine, the temperature in the room dropping despite the heating system's best efforts. The lights flickered again, plunging me into darkness before stabilizing with a harsh buzz. Desperate to understand what was happening, I grabbed my phone and tried to call for help. But the storm had cut off all communication, the cell towers overwhelmed by the relentless snow and wind. Panic set in as I realized I was completely isolated, trapped in my apartment with the storm outside and the haunting voices inside. I decided to investigate, hoping to find a rational explanation. I moved through the darkened rooms, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the city in stark white. As I walked down the hallway, the whispers intensified, guiding me toward the living room where the snow globe sat on the mantelpiece, a gift from my parents the previous Christmas. I picked it up, shaking it gently. The artificial snow swirled inside. But instead of the usual festive scene, the globe held a miniature version of the city, enveloped in a perpetual blizzard. Tiny cars skidded across the frozen streets, and miniature figures moved frantically, their faces twisted in fear and desperation. Suddenly, the scene inside the globe changed. The miniature cityscape transformed into a nightmarish landscape, buildings collapsing, fires raging, and ghostly apparitions wandering the streets. The whispers seemed to emanate directly from the globe, their voices merging with the storm outside. "Release us," one voice cried, its anguish palpable. "We're trapped." Terrified, I realized that the snow globe was more than just a decoration. It was a conduit for the spirits caught in the storm's wrath. The Great Blizzard of 2016 wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a force that had trapped countless souls, their suffering now mirrored in the storm outside and the whispers within my home. Determined to help, I remembered an old legend my grandmother had told me about a ritual to release trapped spirits during powerful storms. The ritual required a symbolic act of release, a way to let go of the past and offer peace to the restless souls. I gathered the necessary items, candles, salt, and a small mirror from around the apartment. Lighting the candles, I placed them in a circle around the snow globe, sprinkling salt to purify the space. Holding the mirror in front of the globe, I began to recite the incantation, my voice wavering but determined. Spirits of the storm, bound by ice and snow, find your peace. Let your anguish go. Through this glass, we break the chain. Release your souls from endless pain. As I spoke, the storm outside seemed to respond, the winds howling louder and the snow swirling in a frenzied dance. The lights flickered violently, casting chaotic shadows across the room. The miniature figures in the globe began to move with purpose, their actions slowing as if they were gaining control over their fate. The whispers turned into cries of gratitude, their tones shifting from despair to hope. The air grew warmer, the oppressive cold lifting as the spirits found solace. The snow globe glowed with a soft, ethereal light, the miniature cityscape transforming into a serene winter wonderland, peaceful and untouched by the chaos outside. A final, collective sigh echoed through the apartment, the storm beginning to abate as the spirits were finally released. The lights steadied, the wind's fury diminishing, and the snow began to settle into a calm blanket. I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. The weight of the storm's curse lifted from my shoulders. But just as peace settled, I heard a faint, sorrowful whisper. "Thank you," it said, a single voice blending with the fading storm. I turned to the snow globe, now silent and still, its surface reflecting the calm aftermath. The spirits were gone, their pain finally at rest. Exhausted but hopeful, I knew that the storm had changed me. The Great Blizzard of 2016 was more than a weather event. It was a harrowing reminder of nature's power and the unseen forces that linger in its wake. As the city began to recover from the devastation, I found solace in knowing that I had played a part in bringing peace to those lost souls. Their stories now a part of the storm's legacy. Years later, when I hear the wind howl or see the first snowflakes of winter, I remember that fateful blizzard and the spirits I helped release. The memory serves as a chilling reminder that some storms bring more than just snow. They bring the echoes of lives lost and the power of compassion to bridge the realms of the living and the dead. And as long as there are stories to be told and storms to be weathered, the legacy of the Great Blizzard of 2016 will live on, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit and the unseen bonds that connect us all. Story number 5. The Colorado Blizzard of 2013. I never imagined that a winter storm could turn my life into a nightmare. Growing up in Denver, Colorado, I was no stranger to harsh winters. The Rockies around us were beautiful yet unforgiving, with their pristine snow-covered peaks and treacherous slopes. But nothing could have prepared me for the blizzard of March 2013. A storm that would etch itself into my memory and haunt me for years to come. It was mid-March, and the weather had been unusually warm for winter. I had decided to take a short trip to Breckenridge, a renowned ski resort nestled in the heart of the Rockies, to unwind and enjoy some skiing with my friends. The weather forecasts had been predicting a severe storm system moving in, but we dismissed it as another false alarm. After all, we were seasoned skiers, accustomed to navigating through difficult conditions. We arrived in Breckenridge on a sunny afternoon, the town bustling with tourists eager to hit the slopes. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine trees filled our lungs as we checked into our lodge. The warmth of the fireplace and the inviting atmosphere of the lodge provided a stark contrast to the impending storm. That evening, we gathered in the main lounge, sharing stories and planning our next day's adventures. The weather outside had started to change, the sky turning a deep gray as dark clouds rolled in from the west. The wind picked up, howling through the narrow streets and rattling the windows of our cozy retreat. We decided to stay in, anticipating a mild snowstorm that would add a picturesque layer to the already stunning landscape. But the next morning, our worst fears were realized. The storm had hit with unprecedented ferocity. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, blanketing the mountains and transforming the town into a frozen wasteland. The temperature plummeted, and the winds howled like banshees, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Roads were quickly becoming impassable, and communication lines were down, leaving us isolated from the outside world. As the day wore on, we realized that we were trapped. The lodge was cut off, surrounded by miles of uncharted, snow-covered terrain. We had no way of knowing when help would arrive, if at all. Panic began to set in as the reality of our situation sank in. Supplies were limited, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. That night, the true horror began. The wind outside was relentless, battering the lodge with icy fury. The snow piled higher, forcing us to barricade the doors and windows as best as we could. The power flickered and then failed, plunging us into darkness. Candles were lit, their flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. It was then that the strange occurrences started. First, it was subtle whispers carried by the wind, soft footsteps echoing through the halls, and the feeling of being watched. We dismissed them as our minds playing tricks on us, the stress of the situation amplifying our fears. But as the hours turned into days, the phenomena grew more sinister. One night, as I sat by the candlelight, I heard a distinct sound, a child's laughter, clear and haunting, echoing through the lodge. I called out, asking if anyone else heard it, but the only response was the howling wind. My friends and I huddled together, exchanging uneasy glances, unsure of what to believe. The next morning, we discovered that some of our supplies had gone missing. Food was eaten, and blankets were torn. Accusations flew. Friendships strained under the pressure. It was as if an unseen force was tormenting us, exploiting our vulnerabilities and fears. Desperate to find answers, I ventured out into the storm, hoping to find a clue or perhaps a way to signal for help. The snow was so deep that my boots sank with every step, and the wind was a constant, blinding force. Hours passed as I wandered aimlessly, the landscape a disorienting maze of white. Exhausted and freezing, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin hidden deep in the woods. Inside, the cabin was cold and dark, but it offered a temporary refuge from the storm. As I explored, I found remnants of previous inhabitants, faded photographs, broken furniture, and old journals. One journal caught my eye, its pages yellowed with age. I began to read, uncovering the tragic story of a family who had been caught in a similar blizzard decades ago. They had become trapped, their spirits never finding peace, forever reliving the horror of their final days. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the parallels to our own situation. Was the storm merely a natural disaster, or was something more malevolent at play? The whispers seemed to echo the sentiments of the trapped family, their anguish resonating through the pages of the journal. I knew then that we were not alone. Something dark and vengeful was haunting the storm, feeding off our fear and desperation. Determined to break the curse, I returned to the lodge, sharing the journal's contents with my friends. We decided to perform a ritual to honor the lost family and release their spirits from their eternal torment. The ritual required candles, salt, and a personal item from each of us, a token of our own lives to offer as a bridge between the living and the dead. As night fell, we gathered in the main lounge, the storm outside showing no signs of abating. The wind howled louder than ever, the snow piling higher with each passing hour. We lit the candles, the flames flickering violently as if resisting our efforts. One by one, we placed our personal items on the table, forming a circle of sacrifice and hope. I began the incantation, my voice trembling but resolute. Spirits of the lost, trapped by the storm's might, we honor your memory and seek to set you free. May your suffering end, and may you find peace beyond this night. As I spoke, the temperature in the room dropped even further, our breath visible in the icy air. The candles flickered and then went out, plunging us into darkness once more. The whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of sorrow and pain. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, the spirits of the lost family materializing before us. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions etched with endless sorrow. "Thank you," they whispered in unison, their voices filled with a sense of relief and gratitude. The storm outside began to calm, the winds dying down and the snow settling into a peaceful blanket. The light faded, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. We stood there, exhausted but hopeful, knowing that we had done what we could to help the trapped souls find peace. The lodge felt different now, lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from its walls. In the days that followed, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a serene, snow-covered landscape. Roads were cleared, and communication lines were restored. Rescue teams arrived, finding us safe but shaken, our story of haunting spirits adding to the local lore of the Great American Blizzard of 2016. Life gradually returned to normal, but the experience left an indelible mark on all of us. We had faced the storm's fury and the supernatural forces that sought to claim us, emerging with a deeper understanding of the thin veil between our world and the next. The memories of those lost souls lingered, a haunting reminder of the power of nature and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Years later, when I look out at the snow-covered Rockies, I remember that fateful blizzard and the spirits we helped release. The storm of 2016 was more than just a weather event. It was a convergence of past and present, a testament to the resilience of those who survive and the compassion that can bridge the realms of the living and the dead. And as long as there are stories to be told and storms to be weathered, the legacy of that great blizzard will live on, a chilling reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and courage can prevail. Story number 6. Whiteout. I never thought a blizzard could bring more than just whiteouts and stranded cars. Growing up in Texas, snow was a rare and magical occurrence, something you'd see in movies or read about in old family stories. But February 2019 was different. The storm that descended upon North America was relentless, a beast of ice and wind that showed no mercy. It ravaged states unaccustomed to its fury: Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, turning familiar landscapes into frozen nightmares. I was driving home from work in Oklahoma City, tired and eager to get back to my warm house. The weather had been brewing all week, but I hadn't taken it seriously. Reports of heavy snowfall and powerful winds were dismissed as exaggerated forecasts. I trusted the roads, the familiar routes that had seen me through countless winters. But as the day wore on, the sky darkened ominously, and the first heavy flakes began to fall, coating the city in a deceptive layer of white. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, visibility was near zero. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up, their frantic motions a poor defense against the relentless snowfall. I turned on the radio, hoping for some reassurance. But all I heard was the crackling of static and urgent warnings about the storm's intensity. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling my car and making it hard to focus on the road. I decided to head to the nearest rest stop, a small, dimly lit place that looked deserted under the heavy snow. As I approached, my headlights barely pierced the thick curtain of white. The sign above the exit barely registered through the blinding snow. But I saw it: "Welcome to Frostbite Rest Area." Relief washed over me as I slowed down, pulling into a parking spot that seemed to have been reserved for emergencies. Inside, the rest stop was eerily quiet. The few flickering fluorescent lights cast long shadows, and the air was thick with the scent of old coffee and damp blankets. I grabbed a cup of hot tea from the vending machine, grateful for the warmth it provided. Sitting alone in the dim corner, I tried to make sense of the chaos outside. The storm raged on. Snow piling up against the windows and wind slamming doors shut with bone-chilling force. As the hours passed, the storm showed no signs of letting up. The rest stop seemed to become a microcosm of the storm's madness. Desperate souls seeking shelter, each one with their own story of being trapped by the blizzard. Conversations were hushed, eyes darting nervously toward the windows as if expecting something, or someone, to appear from the swirling whiteout. It was around midnight when the power went out, plunging the rest stop into darkness. The only light came from the harsh glow of my phone's screen and the fading embers of the candles some of the stranded drivers had lit for warmth. The temperature inside plummeted, and I wrapped myself tighter in my coat, shivering despite the layers. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the storm's roar. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the cold and isolation. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct, threading through the howling wind outside. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, voices filled with fear and desperation. "Help us!" One voice cried, its tone urgent and sorrowful. I looked around, trying to locate the source. The rest stop was empty except for a few other stranded travelers, each lost in their own thoughts. Suddenly, the door to the restroom burst open, snow and ice flying into the room. A figure stood there, barely visible through the heavy snowfall, eyes hollow and face contorted in anguish. "Please, help us," the figure repeated, its voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Panic surged through me as I backed away, knocking over a candle in the process. The flame flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The figure began to move towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by unseen strings. I stumbled back, tripping over the uneven floor and falling hard. "Get away!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet. But the figure was relentless, advancing with a speed that defied logic. As it drew closer, the air around it seemed to warp, the temperature dropping even further. The whispers intensified, surrounding me with their mournful pleas. I turned to run, but the rest stop had transformed. The once familiar space now felt like a labyrinth of endless corridors and dark rooms, each one echoing with the voices of the trapped. I was disoriented, lost in a maze of ice and snow, the storm outside a constant reminder of my isolation. Desperate, I tried to call out for help, my voice drowned by the storm's fury. The whispers swirled around me, their words becoming more frantic and pleading. "We're lost," they cried. "We can't find our way home." Just as I felt the fear reaching its peak, a beam of light pierced through the darkness, guiding me toward a doorway that hadn't been there before, summoning every ounce of courage. I followed the light, the whispers fading behind me as I stepped into a small, icy room. In the center stood an old snow globe, its glass cracked and filled with swirling snow and ghostly figures. The whispers converged on the snow globe, their voices now harmonious yet still tinged with sorrow. "Release us," they implored. "Set us free." I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the globe. The ice-cold glass sent a shiver through my body, and the snow inside seemed to respond, the miniature storm intensifying. Images flashed before my eyes, families stranded in snowdrifts, cars buried under heaps of white, lives lost to the merciless cold. The spirits of those who had perished in the storm were trapped within, their suffering eternal. Realizing what I had to do, I began to shake the globe, hoping to disrupt the curse that held them captive. The snow swirled faster, the ghostly figures becoming more defined, their faces etched with pain and longing. The room began to shake, the ice cracking beneath my feet as the storm inside the globe mirrored the one outside. The whispers grew into a deafening roar, the voices merging into a collective plea. "Help us find peace," they cried, their desperation palpable. I continued to shake the globe, my movements frantic as the storm reached its zenith. Suddenly, the globe shattered, the glass splintering into 1,000 pieces that dissolved into the air like snowflakes melting in the sun. A blinding light engulfed the room, and the storm outside began to calm, the winds subsiding and the snow settling into a gentle blanket. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The rest stop returned to normal, the lights flickering back on and the doors remaining closed. I stood there, breathing heavily, the remnants of the snow globe scattered around me. The whispers had ceased, the spirits finally free to move on from their eternal torment. The storm had taken its toll, but in the end, compassion had triumphed over fear, offering solace to those lost souls who had suffered in silence. As dawn broke, the first light of day revealed a world transformed by the storm. The snow-covered landscape was beautiful yet desolate, the chaos of the night a distant memory. I packed up my belongings, knowing that I had experienced something extraordinary, a battle against nature's wrath and the supernatural forces that sought to claim us. Driving home, the roads were still treacherous, but the storm had lost its malevolent edge. Emergency crews worked tirelessly to clear the highways, and the spirit of community shone through as neighbors helped one another survive the ordeal. The blizzard of 2019 had left its mark on the Midwest, a reminder of nature's power and the resilience of the human spirit. But for me, the memory of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the voices lost to the storm and the desperate pleas for help. It taught me that even in the darkest of times, there is always a chance to offer compassion and make a difference. The Great American Blizzard of 2019 was a testament to the unyielding force of nature and the enduring strength of those who refuse to give up, even when the odds are stacked against them. And as I reflect on that harrowing experience, I carry with me the echoes of those lost souls, their whispers now a part of my story, a chilling reminder that some storms leave more than just snow. They leave memories, scars, and the indomitable will to survive. Story number 7. Frozen Shadows. February 2020. The Alaskan winter had always been brutal, but this storm was something beyond the worst I'd ever experienced. I had moved to Anchorage a few years earlier, seeking solitude and a fresh start after the chaos of city life. The rugged beauty of the last frontier had been both a balm and a challenge. But nothing could have prepared me for the night the blizzard hit. I was working as a wildlife researcher, studying the elusive lynx that roamed the vast expanses of the Chugach Mountains. Our research station was a remote outpost, accessible only by a narrow, winding road that was easily cut off by heavy snowfall. We were a small team: me, Sarah, our logistics coordinator Mike, and 2 other researchers. We had been monitoring lynx movements for months, tracking their patterns and behaviors in the unforgiving terrain. It was the first week of February when the weather forecasts began to predict an unprecedented storm system. Meteorologists warned of a super blizzard heading our way, with wind speeds reaching up to 120 kilometers per hour and snowfall rates that would dwarf any recorded in recent history. At first, we took it in stride, knowing that Alaska's winters were no joke. But as the days passed, the warnings grew more dire, and the storm's approach became unmistakable. By mid-February, the sky was a perpetual shade of gray, the sun a distant memory behind thick, ominous clouds. The temperature plummeted, and the wind howled incessantly, a constant reminder of the impending disaster. We reinforced the research station as best as we could, stacking firewood, securing windows, and rationing our supplies. The thought of being trapped in the wilderness for days on end was daunting, but we were prepared mentally. At least, the blizzard hit on the night of February 20th. The transition was swift and brutal. One moment, we were bundled up and working late into the evening, and the next, the storm unleashed its full fury. Snow piled up against the doors, windows rattled violently, and the wind howled like a living beast, threatening to tear the building apart. The temperature dropped to unimaginable lows, and the power flickered before going out entirely, plunging us into darkness. We huddled together in the main living area, the only light coming from the dim glow of our emergency lanterns. Sarah tried to keep spirits high, telling stories and sharing memories, but the tension was palpable. Mike took charge, organizing our limited resources and ensuring everyone stayed warm and fed. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the isolation began to take its toll. As the hours turned into days, we faced the harsh reality of our situation. Communication lines were down, and there was no way to call for help. We rationed our food and water, but the storm showed no mercy, making it impossible to venture outside for supplies. The nights were the worst, dark, cold, and filled with an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on us. It was on the third night that the first strange occurrence happened. We heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, crunching through the thick snow. Mike grabbed his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as he cautiously approached the window. But when he peered out, there was nothing but the swirling snow and the shadows it created. We dismissed it as the storm playing tricks on our minds, the isolation amplifying our fears. But the footsteps continued, growing louder and more persistent. Voices whispered on the wind, indistinct and haunting. Objects moved on their own. Doors slammed shut without warning, and an eerie feeling of being watched settled over us. Sarah insisted that we stay together, but the paranoia began to erode our unity, each of us retreating into our own fears. One night, as the storm raged outside, I was jolted awake by the sound of crying. It was a soft, sorrowful sound, echoing through the walls of the research station. I followed the noise to the small storage room, where I found Sarah standing by the window, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. "It's just the storm," I said, trying to reassure her, but my own voice lacked conviction. But the crying continued, growing louder and more desperate. We decided to investigate, despite the freezing cold and the danger of the storm outside. Armed with flashlights, we ventured into the darkness, the wind howling around us like a chorus of tormented souls. The storage room was empty, but the crying persisted, leading us deeper into the building. We reached the attic, a place we rarely visited, filled with old equipment and forgotten supplies. The crying was now deafening, a cacophony of anguish that seemed to emanate from the very walls. In the center of the attic stood an old, ornate mirror, its surface cracked and clouded with age. The crying seemed to be coming from within the mirror, as if something or someone was trapped inside. Sarah approached the mirror cautiously, her hand reaching out to touch the glass. As her fingers made contact, a surge of icy energy shot through her, and the mirror began to shimmer. A ghostly figure materialized within the glass, a woman in tattered clothing, her face contorted in sorrow and pain. Her eyes locked onto ours, and her mouth moved as if trying to speak. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing in our minds. "We're trapped in the storm." Terrified, we stumbled back, the apparition disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The attic fell silent, the storm outside momentarily subdued. We realized that the blizzard was not just a natural disaster but something far more sinister, an entity feeding off our fear and desperation, trapping lost souls within the storm's icy grip. Determined to break the curse, we delved into the history of the research station. Old records and forgotten journals revealed that decades earlier, a similar storm had struck the region, claiming the lives of many, including a group of researchers who had gone missing. Their spirits had never found peace, their anguish binding them to the storm, forever reliving their final moments of fear and isolation. We decided that the only way to free the trapped souls was to perform a ritual of release, honoring their memories and offering them a path to peace. The ritual required symbols of hope and compassion, candles, salt, and personal items that represented our connection to the living world. On the fifth night of the storm, we gathered in the main living area, the snowstorm raging outside like a beast in torment. We placed the candles in a circle, sprinkled salt around the perimeter, and each of us laid out a personal item: Sarah's locket, Mike's compass, and mine, a photograph of my family. The mirror stood at the center, a focal point for our intentions. We began the ritual, reciting prayers of peace and remembrance, our voices steady despite the fear that still gripped us. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening as if the storm was resisting our efforts. The crying returned, now interspersed with voices filled with hope and gratitude. As we continued, the mirror began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. The ghostly figure appeared once more, her expression shifting from sorrow to serenity. "Thank you," she whispered, her form becoming more translucent as the light enveloped her. "You've set us free." A surge of energy swept through the room, the storm outside beginning to abate as the spirits found peace. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a profound sense of calm and relief. We had done it, we had broken the curse, allowing the lost souls to move on from their eternal torment. The next morning, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a serene, snow-covered landscape. Rescue teams arrived, finding us safe but exhausted. Our story of haunted spirits and a malevolent storm adding to the local lore of the Great Alaskan Blizzard of 2020. Life gradually returned to normal, but the experience left an indelible mark on all of us. We had faced not just nature's fury but the supernatural forces that sought to claim us. The memory of those trapped souls lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our world and the next. Years later, when I see a snowstorm approaching, I think back to that harrowing winter. The blizzard of 2020 was more than just a weather event. It was a battle against fear and despair, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of compassion to bridge the realms of the living and the dead. And as long as there are storms to weather and souls to save, the legacy of that great blizzard will live on, a chilling reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and courage can prevail.